Pontaguichin First Nation first began to develop what is now the Lands and Resources Act many, many years ago. It came out of the work that our community has done in terms of negotiating our self-government agreement, which took effect in 1995. And part of that agreement, an important part of it, was that we would be able to make our own laws as Pontaguichin about how we protect and care for the land that we also fought very hard for to have recognized as the land that we are to own and control and continue our special relationship with. So the purpose and the intent of those agreements was always for us to one day begin writing our own laws like the Lands and Resources Act. And so after the first decades of our implementation, we come to realize that this is a really important area that we start to say what we want to have happen on our land and how that should happen. So several years ago, there was a committee that was established who began a lot of hard work with another lawyer, experienced in developing this type of law with other First Nations. And over several years, they've developed what is now a very substantial draft law, which we've been talking to the community about. And I've been asked to come in and sort of help near this finishing process to carry on that good work that's been done over many years, from our past leaders negotiating to the committee, putting a lot of their own time and energy in what this law should say and do, to now this process of making sure people are informed and understand the importance of the law. The Lands and Resources Act is designed to exercise the authority that is in our self-government agreement. And that self-government agreement jurisdiction in terms of the land is focused on the areas of settlement land within our traditional territory. So if you look on the map of the Pontaguichin Traditional Territory, you'll see large parcels of settlement land in different areas of the traditional territory, including in and around Old Crow, around Crow Flats, and other areas throughout the territory. These are special areas of land that through our land claim agreement with Canada, it was actually recognized that we are the true owners who have a right to control 100% what goes on in those areas in terms of land management. So through this law, we're really trying to exercise what we already have negotiated for in the self-government agreement to care for these areas of land that have been recognized as ours. It's important to understand this law won't apply and won't affect what people do out on the land outside of settlement land in other areas of the traditional territory. What this law will do, though, is where there are, for example, traditional use areas of families or individuals within settlement land, is they'll have the option, it won't be mandatory, but they'll have the option to access some of the new tools under the law that we're creating to provide new options for them of how they might want to have that recognized and recorded as being the area of their family, and giving them new ways to pass that down on to their children or other family members when it's their time to pass. Those are things I think about how the law applies to settlement land that will be benefits. There'll be things that we haven't had before available to our community members. And so that I think is going to create new ways that we interact with the land, especially in and around the community of Old Crow. I think this step that our First Nation is seeking to take in terms of establishing a written law that's informed by our history and our culture and our own values about how we relate to the land and how we use it, and how we make sure it's protected for future generations, I think is incredibly important for us today, but also for our future generations. And having a law that finally reflects who we are about our own land and our close relationship to it is something that our future generations can look to and help find guidance about, in the future about how they should be looking after and caring for the land, and that we've taken the step and created a new tool for them to use to continue on our own way of life here in our traditional territory. For a long portion of our history, we had a lot of freedom and self-determination, and we had control of the whole of our territory. And we didn't have written laws, but we did have law and things that guided how we conducted ourselves on the land. And this is really an opportunity now, after really over a century of having other laws passed by other governments without our consent or without our being informed, having been imposed on us. And those laws have had a really significant impact on people's well-being, on our way of life. We can think of many examples of different laws about how we could interact or do things like hunt or fish or trap that were really curtailed in the past, and did create times of hardship. And we're now in this place because of a lot of hard work of past generations to now take control and have our own law. And I think that's reflected in the Draft Lands and Resources Act really clearly in that law, things that are exempt from needing any kind of permission if you're a citizen, and that is any traditional activity on our settlement land. And I think that's just an example of how we approach our relationship to the land, and a recognition that, when we're carrying out our traditions, when we're being who we are as Vantat, that's actually what cares for the land and protects it. And I think this law is a good step towards, continuing to build that foundation for our future. One of the important things about the Lands and Resources Act is going to be its implementation after it's passed. We can try our best always and put our best efforts and our best intentions forward and truly come up with laws that we feel reflect who we are. But as we know, self-government is always a learning process. And I think as a community, we've experienced this in the past with things in our constitution, which we've changed over time as we began to implement them, because we've realized in the implementation process that what we had set out and intended to do needed additional or other things to support that. And so the positive thing about this legislative development is that we can continuously review how the law is being implemented, where there might be challenging issues and where we might need to rethink certain things. And as is different from our Constitution, which requires a pretty significant process to even bring forward an amendment to be considered, changes to legislation are much, simpler and straightforward to do. And there's not as sort of many barriers to really looking at a law and updating it and reflecting it to meet changing or new circumstances, which I think is always going to be the case. There are no laws and legislation anywhere in Canada that stay the same forever. We can look at the Yukon, for example, now just replacing colonial era mining legislation. We see that legislation hasn't stood the test of time, and I expect our laws will continue to need to be updated over time. And there's nothing in the self-government agreement or in the legislation that's going to prevent us from sort of doing that type of work. The other, I think, important step that the Lands and Resources Act represents is a focus on the settlement land areas within the traditional territory in terms of asserting our role in the management and control of those lands. Through our final agreement, we negotiated a number of arrangements for us to be involved in the co-management for the non-settlement land throughout our traditional territory. And for the first many decades of our implementation, our community has done a lot of remarkable work in advancing the implementation those aspects of our final agreement, through the North Yukon Land Use Plan, the development and passage of the YESAB legislation, special management areas, national parks. These are all things that are, in a way, supposed to uphold the same values that we hold as Vantakwichin, that we want to see in the management of our settlement land. Now we're having an opportunity to focus not on what we negotiated in the final agreement, but what we negotiated in our self-government agreement, and what we have the power to do on settlement land. So I see this as an opportunity to continue to sort of assert our influence and control over the whole of our territory. One of the other things that is informing how this law is going to be developed and eventually brought into effect and starting to be implemented is defining and establishing the plans for what's going to be required as a government and as a community to use and implement all the new tools that we're creating under that act. So for example, under the law, there will be the requirement for there to be a clerk who has certain responsibilities of recording people's interests that they might want to have registered, about either a personal or family allocation on settlement land. And so there'll be a need, for example, to identify a person to fulfill that position, to provide them with the training that they'll need when the law is ready to be implemented. Another area which I think is really exciting in the development of the law is giving some additional tools for our guardians and an opportunity to potentially expand the role of our guardians and what they do within our traditional territory. It will give them, certain new ability to do things that they currently are not able to do without the support of a law like the Lands and Resources Act. And I think we'll create new opportunities for our people to really be on the ground, a part of implementing this law in a major way. I really encourage people to think about the law, talk about it, ask questions, speak with your families, because it is something important, and it's all of our law as a First Nation. It's a collective law, and it's not just about us here today. It's about all those past generations that actually got us to this point to be able to do this. And it's about future generations and what we want to see for them and what we want to leave behind for them, like those past generations left behind for us. So I just encourage people to get engaged and understand it. It can be a difficult and complicated process to think about law, and it can sound really technical and hard to understand. But what's going to be the most important is not so much what the law says, but how we as Vantakwichin make it our own.